Stop. Before you scroll past this, you need to hear what is happening to them right now, in this exact moment, as you sit here. They are shaking. Not because something happened to them, because something happened to you. And they were not ready for it. They thought they had you figured out. They thought they knew exactly where you stood, exactly how much you needed them, exactly what role you played in the story they built inside their own mind. And then, something shifted in you. Quietly, internally, without any announcement. And it broke something in them that they cannot explain, cannot reverse, and cannot recover from the way they expected to. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is not what most people talk about when they discuss connection, but it is the only thing that actually explains what is happening between you and this person right now. There is a layer of human connection that exists beneath conversation, beneath text messages, beneath physical presence. It does not require proximity. It does not require words. It functions the way all deep things function, silently and with absolute precision. When two people share a bond that reaches past the surface, past the comfortable and the manageable and the easily explained, they do not simply occupy each other's thoughts. They occupy each other's interior world. And the interior world does not lie. It does not perform. It does not pretend. So when you began to change, and you have been changing, even if you have not fully named it yet, that change did not stay contained inside you. Every deep human connection contains within it an invisible architecture that most people never examine consciously. When two souls share a bond that reaches beyond surface compatibility, beyond shared interests, beyond physical attraction, beyond the comfortable and the easily explained, they begin to function as psychological mirrors for one another. Not metaphorically, functionally. A mirror does not require your permission to reflect. It does not wait for you to feel ready. The moment you stand before it, it shows you exactly what is there. This is precisely how a genuine soulmate connection operates beneath the surface of everything visible. When you undergo real inner transformation, not the performance of change, not the curated version of growth shared on the outside, but the private, difficult, cellular-level shift that happens when a person finally stops abandoning themselves. The person mirrored to you at that depth does not remain untouched by it. They feel the reflection change before they understand why. Before they can construct a rational explanation for the discomfort settling into them, the unconscious has already registered it with complete accuracy. This is why their shock is not a reaction to something you said or did. It is a reaction to something you became. The mirror they had been looking into, the one that reflected a version of you shaped by pain, by waiting, by giving more than was ever returned, has shifted its angle entirely. And what looks back at them now is something they were not prepared to see. The psyche does not lie in these moments. It cannot negotiate with what it recognizes. And what it recognizes in you now is the presence of someone who has returned fully to themselves, which is the single most destabilizing thing a person can witness in someone they once believed they had the luxury of underestimating. Every deep human connection contains within it an invisible architecture that most people never pause to examine. When two people share a bond that moves beneath the surface of ordinary relating, past comfort, past convenience, past the kind of connection that can be easily categorized and safely managed, something begins to form between them that functions less like a relationship and more like a living reflection. This reflection does not operate through conversation or proximity. It operates through the deeper layer of the psyche where feeling lives before language has any opportunity to shape it. And at that layer, change in one person does not stay private. It cannot. The connection itself becomes the channel through which the shift travels, silently and without asking permission from either party. When you begin to genuinely transform, not through performance, not through visible declarations of growth, but through the slow and often invisible work of returning to your own truth, the person whose inner world is woven into yours receives that signal at a frequency their conscious mind has no framework to process. They do not see the change first. They feel a disturbance in something they had quietly depended upon without ever acknowledging the dependence. What they depended upon was the reflection staying familiar. They had grown accustomed to a particular version of you, one shaped by the dynamic between you, by what you absorbed, by how you positioned yourself within what existed. That version felt known to them, predictable in the way that only deeply familiar things feel predictable. And predictability, even when it is rooted in imbalance, creates a kind of unconscious comfort that people only recognize the moment it disappears. Your transformation removed that comfort without warning. The mirror shifted, and what looked back at them was no longer something they already knew how to hold. When someone who is deeply connected to you experiences shock at your transformation, the instinct is to interpret that shock as being centered on you, as being a reaction to your growth, your change, your becoming. And while you are the catalyst, you are not actually what the shock is about. What is breaking open inside them in that moment has very little to do with you, and almost everything to do with the internal structure they built to avoid a truth they were not ready to face. Every person constructs a private narrative about the connections they carry. They assign meanings, establish hierarchies, decide unconsciously who holds more feeling, who needs whom more completely, who would be more devastated by the ending of what exists between them. These narratives are rarely examined consciously. They simply form in the background of daily life, and then quietly govern how a person behaves within the connection, what risks they take, what they delay, what they believe they can afford to leave unresolved. Their narrative about you gave them a particular kind of safety. It told them that the dynamic was stable in a way that favored their comfort. It told them that your feelings were more visible, more urgent, more dependent on resolution than their own. And that belief allowed them to move through time without the pressure of genuine accountability, without the discomfort of sitting honestly with what they felt and what they were choosing to do with it. Your transformation did not shock them by revealing something about you. It shocked them by demolishing something about themselves. It removed the false foundation their narrative was built upon and forced their inner world to suddenly reckon with a version of reality they had been successfully postponing. The shock is the sound of that postponement finally ending inside them. There is no communication more penetrating than the kind that requires no words. No message more disruptive than the one that arrives not through what is said, but through what a person has quietly become. And in the entire range of signals that can travel through a deep, soul-level connection, genuine self-transformation is the one that cannot be minimized, cannot be rationalized away, and cannot be received without consequence by the person on the other end of the bond. This is because transformation at its truest level is not a change in behavior. It is not a new habit, a new appearance, a new set of circumstances arranged differently around the same inner core. Real transformation is a change in the frequency at which a person exists. It is the shift that happens when someone stops organizing their inner world around a wound and begins organizing it around their own wholeness instead. And that shift does not stay invisible to those who are genuinely connected to them beneath the surface of ordinary life. When you were waiting, when you were carrying more than your share, when your feelings were more visible and your need for resolution more urgent, that state communicated something to them constantly. Not through anything you said or did deliberately, but through the energetic reality of where you were internally. And they received that communication and built their sense of security within the connection around it. Your longing became a kind of anchor that kept the dynamic stable in a way that required nothing difficult from them. When that anchor lifted, the stability they never acknowledged depending on disappeared with it. What you replaced it with, the quiet solidity of someone who has returned to their own center, who no longer requires their acknowledgement to know their own value, sent a signal their entire inner world was forced to receive, and could find absolutely no comfortable response to. If this is resonating with something you have been carrying silently, if something in you already knew that this person feels your shift, even though nothing has been said between you, drop the word shift in the comments right now. Because what comes next is going to explain exactly what is happening inside them and what your transformation has already set into motion that cannot be stopped. There is a particular kind of control that people exercise within deep connections that they never openly acknowledge and rarely examine honestly even within themselves. It is not the obvious control of domination or deliberate manipulation. It is far quieter than that. It is the control that comes from believing the outcome is already known, that the other person's position within the dynamic is fixed, that time is a resource available in unlimited supply, and that the emotional landscape between two people will remain navigable on their preferred terms for as long as they choose to keep it that way. This belief does not announce itself as control. It feels, from the inside, like simple confidence, like a reasonable reading of how things stand, like an accurate understanding of where both people are and what each of them needs from the connection. But beneath that confident reading is an assumption so deeply embedded it was never once questioned. The assumption that you would remain emotionally accessible to them in the same way, at the same depth, with the same availability, indefinitely. That assumption was the actual source of their control. Not power over you directly, but power over the narrative, power over the pacing, power over when resolution would happen, whether vulnerability would be offered, whether the connection would be honored or conveniently set aside until a more comfortable moment arrived for them to engage with it honestly. When you transformed, that power did not gradually diminish. It collapsed. Suddenly and completely, the way structures collapse when the single point they were depending on for stability gives way without warning. They did not lose control of you. They never truly had it. What they lost was control of the story, control of the timeline, and most devastatingly, control of the version of themselves they had been carefully avoiding through the convenient certainty that you would always be there, waiting exactly as they left you. Every person carries within them a place that was shaped by early pain, by moments where love was conditional, where presence was unreliable, where they learned without being told directly that closeness carries risk and that genuine connection eventually becomes a source of loss rather than a source of safety. This place does not disappear with time. It does not heal simply because years pass or because life moves forward into new circumstances and new relationships. It waits. Quietly and with extraordinary patience, it waits for the conditions that will make it speak again. Those conditions are never ordinary. Surface-level connections, comfortable relationships, the kind of closeness that demands nothing too unfamiliar from the inner world. None of these reach deep enough to disturb what lives in that wounded place. The wound stays silent precisely because nothing significant enough has arrived to wake it. It remains in the background, shaping behavior in subtle ways, influencing choices from a distance, but never fully surfacing into the light where it would have to be directly confronted. What wakes the wound is encountering something real. Something that reaches past every carefully constructed defense and touches the part of the person that was formed before the defenses existed. And genuine transformation in someone they are soul bonded to is exactly that kind of encounter. Your growth did not simply impress them or unsettle them at a surface level. It reached directly into the place inside them where their oldest and most unresolved pain lives, and it made that pain suddenly, unavoidably audible, because you're becoming forced to confrontation they had no preparation for. The wound that had been silent throughout every comfortable and manageable season of their life suddenly found itself face to face with evidence that real growth is possible, that people do return to themselves, that love at genuine depth does not simply dissolve when it is left unattended, and that their own avoidance has been costing them something far more significant than they ever allowed themselves to honestly calculate. There is a form of blindness that has nothing to do with the eyes. It is the blindness that settles over a person when they are too close to something genuinely rare to perceive its rarity accurately. When something of extraordinary value exists within ordinary reach, within the familiar texture of daily life and routine emotional exchange, the mind does not automatically register it as extraordinary. It registers it as simply present, as available, as a constant that can be returned to whenever the timing feels more convenient or the emotional conditions feel more favorable. This is not cruelty in most cases. It is a failure of perception that only corrects itself under one specific condition: the moment the rare thing is no longer within reach in the way it once was. Distance does not always clarify value. Absence does not automatically produce appreciation in everyone. But genuine transformation in the person who was undervalued, the quiet and unmistakable becoming of someone into a fuller and more complete version of themselves, produces a clarity that no amount of deliberate distance could ever manufacture artificially. They are experiencing that clarity now. Not as a gentle dawning of understanding, but as an impact. As the specific and irreversible shock of recognizing, in a moment that arrived without warning, that what they treated as ordinary was in fact something they will spend a considerable portion of their remaining life being unable to locate again in another person. Not because such depth does not exist elsewhere in the world, but because the particular combination of qualities that made you who you are, the specific texture of your presence, the precise way your inner world meets the world around it, is not something that repeats itself in another form simply because they are willing to look for it. Rare things do not wait to be recognized forever, and part of what is shaking them now is the devastating understanding that they are only seeing your rarity clearly at the exact moment it has moved entirely and irrevocably beyond their comfortable reach. There is a law that operates beneath the visible surface of human connection, beneath the words exchanged and the silences held, and the decisions made about who to reach toward and who to leave waiting. It is not a law that can be argued with, or negotiated around, or suspended for the convenience of someone who would prefer not to feel its effects. It simply operates, the way all fundamental things operate, without requiring acknowledgement or belief from anyone subject to it. The law is this: when a person undergoes genuine inner transformation, the energetic reality of who they are shifts at a level so foundational that everyone carrying a deep bond with them feels the change before they can name it, before they can explain it, before they can do anything useful with the information arriving through the connection they share. This is not mysticism. It is the natural consequence of what deep bonds actually are beneath the surface of how most people think about them. A genuine soul-level connection is not simply an emotional preference, or a strong feeling, or a history shared between two people. It is an entanglement at the level where the self meets the world before conscious thought has any opportunity to intervene and manage the experience into something more comfortable and controlled. At that level, you cannot change without them knowing. The frequency at which you exist, the internal orientation from which you meet every moment of your life, the quality of presence you carry into each day, all of it transmits constantly through the bond, regardless of physical distance or deliberate silence or the amount of time that has passed without direct contact between you. What they are feeling right now is not imagination, and it is not coincidence, and it is not something they can resolve by simply redirecting their attention elsewhere. Because transformation of this depth and this authenticity does not stop transmitting simply because the person receiving it would find it far more comfortable if it did. Everything that has been said here points toward a single truth that most people spend years circling without ever landing on directly. The connection you carry, the bond that has been examined from every angle throughout this speech, was never as one-sided as the dynamic between you made it feel. It was never as fragile as their distance suggested. It was never as finished as their silence implied. What it was, and what it has remained beneath every layer of avoidance and delay and carefully maintained emotional distance on their part, is real. And real things do not dissolve simply because one person lacked the courage to honor them at the moment courage was most required. You did the work they were not yet ready to do, not for them, not to send a signal, not to provoke the reaction now moving through them without their permission. You did it because something inside you understood, even in the most painful seasons of this connection, that your own wholeness was never something that could afford to wait for another person's readiness. That your becoming was never contingent on their acknowledgement. That the most powerful thing you could ever do within this bond had nothing to do with reaching toward them, and everything to do with returning fully and without apology to yourself. And that return has done something they cannot undo, cannot ignore, and cannot continue to outrun, no matter how practiced they have become at creating distance between themselves and what they genuinely feel. The shock moving through them right now is not the beginning of their story about you. It is the moment their story about you finally collapsed into honesty. And what stands in the space that collapse has created is not uncertainty about your worth or your value or what you brought to this connection. What stands there is you, whole, transformed, and completely beyond the reach of anyone who has not done the same work within themselves to deserve that version of you now.